whatever technical accomplishments or the risk of electrical vehicles may be. But the real challenge was making the consumers want them, especially in a country like India. And then Tata Motors has not only overcome that challenge, but also listened to its consumers by giving its most best-selling EV a proper refresh in the form of the Nexon EV Max. So taking the performance to the max in the Nexon EV Max is a larger battery pack, which is 30% larger, but having a 33% higher capacity, also pushing the power now more than 140, approximately 141 horsepower. And the torque is also now 250 Newton meters, which is available in a typical instant form like any EV. So we were well aware that the Nexon EV also had that typical EV fashion performance. But in the EV Max, yeah, you get those understeers. So that EV Max gives an added rush to the older Nexon EV. And that is where that extra horsepower and that extra torque comes into play. Also, single gear ratio is lag free and it detects all the throttle responses very well in both the modes. Right now I am in sport mode, but however, as soon as I go into the eco mode also,
economy drive mode activated.
Okay, so it still has that detection capability when you feather the throttle, and it doesn't get confused on the amount of inputs it's getting. So that is something which is a good calibration done by Tata Motors with the throttle, the battery pack and the motor to work in that synchronicity to give it a seamless driving experience. Also, as we are talking about the performance, it is also very important to note and appreciate the fact that Tata Motors have listened to the consumers and have given the EV Max variant all 4 disc brakes. And I think the tires are also upgraded with, though they are still MRFs, but they are eco tread, giving in mind the overall eco theme. So that's another noteworthy observation I made when I started driving the Nexon a few hours back. Another highlight and an added feature of the driving performance and the driving feel is the customizable driving regen modes. There are, I believe, 4 modes you can select. So accordingly, the car selects the regen powers the driver may like. Right now, as I can see, that was on level 2 and it was pretty strong in that level of braking. So anywhere 2 or 3, it is very, very drivable in city. And if you are getting used to this, you will be able to save on a lot of service cost when it comes to brake service requirements, be it both the pads and a longer life for your disc as well. So while driving the Nexon EV Max, I found out something interestingly positive. Let me elaborate that with a few examples. Suppose when you drive a very low-slung sedan or a sports car, your center of gravity is down very low. And similarly, if you drive a very high ground clearance or maybe a body-on-frame SUV or a large-bodied SUV or a van, your center of gravity is very up high. Whereas in the Nexon EV, the center of gravity feels extremely low. And thanks to the battery pack, which is at the base of the car, on the floor of the car. And this makes and gives the Nexon EV a very low center of gravity. And it not only does that, but also gives it a very interesting and a very rare driving experience, because it is a high ground clearance, a very high ground clearance car, which is having the crossover SUV style body around it, and with a low center of gravity. It's something very uniquely rewarding when you want to get and indulge in a sporty drive. To understand this segment better, it is important to understand the platform. So the Nexon EV is based on the modified X1 platform with the adaptability of the Ziptron Gen 1 EV architecture, which makes it inherent a good ride quality and decent road manners. So as we are talking about the ride quality, also the ground clearance is very good. We took that speed breaker without any hesitation at around 20 kilometers per hour. Also the suspension is very well tuned to take care of whatever road undulations which the city as well as the rural roads might put you on. It is having a decently sized thick tire profile at 215/60, and that brings a good amount of confidence on bad roads as well. A point which with respect to IC engine Nexon was that it had a bit of a bumpy ride, whereas in the Nexon EV, thanks to the battery pack being at the base of the car, it has settled down a bit. With another important factor for it to make it settle down is the weight also, which makes it settle down, and the suspension ride much better, because this is around 150 kilos heavier than a typical IC engine Nexon. So overall, I think the ride quality remains another strong point for the Nexon. Now coming to the handling, though most of it was covered during the center of gravity discussion we just had, but I missed out on one point, and that is the Nexon EV Max gets a 50-50 weight distribution, and that is sort of a good thing, and it is, you can say, not entirely easy to achieve that, but in the EV Max, Tata Motors are confident about that 50-50 weight distribution giving a handling edge over the regular internal combustion engine Nexon. So the thing about the dimensions of the Nexon is that it's as small and compact you'd want in a city, whereas it's as large and as spacious as you'd require from the interior's perspective. That is something which has connected with a lot of Nexon buyers, both IC as well as the EV. And another great highlight, or I would say the strong point about the interiors, is the sound insulation. I know this is a EV and that is expected, but overall the sound insulation with the cabin materials and the build quality reflects more so when you spend a few minutes in the car. Immediately you can feel, yes, this is a good, well insulated car. So that is a strong point. Another highlight of this cabin is this jeweled gear knob or the gear selector. It does have a bit of Jaguarness in it. You can say the typical Jaguar handshake, they say, though it doesn't come out, but overall the materials used and the quality with the display, it's absolutely, you can say, maybe segment first. So this feels truly magical. Other than that, I would say that the steering is again typical Tata-like, and though it has some blue stitching, it feels very premium to touch and feel. So that is a great touch. Another aspect which will click with the Indian customers is are these new seats with this kind of beige tone in them. And though it doesn't feel typical beige, and I believe there is a bit of ivory tone in it as well, somewhere between beige and that Tata Safari ivory seats which we had seen. I feel this is a very soothing beige, and Indian consumers will accept it pretty well. For the EV Max, Tata Motors have really worked to add a lot more features, like the IRVM is now auto dimming, there is auto hold, the electronic parking brake, there is wireless charging, and a whole host of other features, which is like cooled seats as well as the cool glove box. I will just drop down the list of the entire feature list which has been added by Tata Motors in this EV Max, so that immediate customers and the target consumers can refer before they finalize their Nexon EV Max. A couple of critical feedbacks here. Starting off with the cluster, I feel the analog speedometer feels a bit off, and with this refresh, this EV Max deserved a complete digital display, which is something I feel could have really upped the ante for Tata Motors. Point number two is the headroom is, you can say, just okay, and that is something which is understandable considering the batteries are underneath the floor. However, considering my height, I feel it is manageable, but any person over 6 feet 1, 6 feet 2 might really have to adjust the seat pretty low. Finally, to conclude things, it would be fair to say that today the economical aspect of owning an EV, a well-priced EV, is the real attraction of buying an EV. And with the Tata Motors ever increasing charging network all across India, it makes it even practical. Tata Motors today enjoys almost 90% of the personal mobility electric vehicle market share in India, and out of which around 19,000 of those have been Nexon EVs. Let's be honest here, the next generation of the EV architecture which we saw debut in the Tata Curve is at least a couple of years away, because it's still in its concept form. Until then, the Tata Motors EV Max Nexon is bound to keep Tata Motors' journey strong in the passenger EV market. And on that note, thank you for watching.